Right, it's the top of the hour and we will get started. I'm sure there'll be more who are joining us, and thank you for those of you who are filling in the poll for the stakeholder group that you represent. And please do continue to introduce yourself with your name, organization, and country. As I said, that really helps the presenters today to know where you're from. So welcome. I am Professor Andrea Rother. I am head of the Environmental Health Division here in Cape Town at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And this is the University of Cape Town's Division of Environmental Health's Pesticide Discussion Forum, which is supported by funding from Sweden through the Swedish Chemicals Agency. Natasha Lalou is in the background offering technical and administrative support. So the link to the WhatsApp group will be put in the chat. Should you have any technical issues, please do reach out to her. So this pesticide discussion forum that we have is really a community of practice around pesticides, and it's bringing together representatives from different regions, different sectors, as you saw from the first slide, and stakeholder groups. And the idea is to really have a mutually supporting consortium of stakeholders to discuss various issues related to pesticides. And as you'll see today, we're talking about alternatives, which is a very important issue that we continue to discuss from time to time. And the idea is to really build the capacity of regulators and researchers and NGOs in low and middle income countries, and to discuss emerging issues, as you'll see with our next discussion, which will be about RNAi pesticides. So we hope to do this by learning from each other, sharing information, as you'll hear today, so data and case studies, really looking for gaps and problem solving, looking how we can prevent pesticide poisoning, chronic effects, environmental contamination, and really with a view to a toxic-free future for the next generation. But if you're new to the discussion, just a reminder, it's not a webinar, so we won't be taking any. The only people who will be speaking are the presenters. We won't actually be taking any questions verbally from participants. We ask you to find the chat function, which is at the bottom of the screen, and to really use that to ask your questions, make comments to each other, so that we have that type of a discussion. It's a nonpartisan group, which means we might not agree with each other's opinions, but we will respect everyone's viewpoints. Do try to include your country or organization when you post a question or a comment, because it really does help the presenters. So if you're unfamiliar with the format, we will have 3 presenters today who will be taking us through implementing pesticide alternatives in urban and agricultural contexts, which are very important. And after each presentation, we will have a bit of time to have a discussion, and there'll be some polls. So make sure you're familiar with the Mentimeter. Right, I will now take us to our first presenter. And just as you can see on the screen, we have 3, as I said, 3 presenters today. Silke, Stephanie, and Alex. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves when they speak, but we are very fortunate to have all 3 of them today who are very experienced in alternatives, and I look forward to hearing what they have to say. So Silke, I'm going to hand over first to you to introduce yourself and to take us through to the first question.
Thank you, Andrea, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Silke Bollmohr. I'm an ecotoxicologist with a PhD in environmental science, and I'm trained also in permaculture design, what I'm going to talk about today. And I've got experience across government, NGOs, and academia, and I focus mainly on pesticide risk assessment and sustainable agriculture in various African countries. On the one hand, through EcoTrac consulting, where I advocate evidence-based policies and provide scientific guidance to reduce the reliance on pesticides, especially HHPs. And currently, I'm a senior policy advisor at Inkota, which is an NGO based in Berlin, in Germany, also working to prohibit highly hazardous pesticides and also working on the export ban of these pesticides and promote agroecological approaches globally. Yeah, so the focus of the discussion today is on alternatives to pesticides, as Andrea said already. And I will introduce you to the concept of system thinking and how permaculture, as one example of system thinking in agriculture, can help to reduce the use of pesticides. But before delving into permaculture and its important aspects, and I guess for some of you, permaculture concepts are quite new, I would like to emphasize that it's really crucial to see farming as part of nature. When we farm, we are working with nature's system. We are not working against it. And pest control is just one part of this bigger picture. And that means thinking about farming, it means seeing how everything fits together like pieces of a puzzle. And this helps us to understand how each part affects the others. And as I said, and pest control is one part of many, many other parts in the farming system. Next slide, please. Yeah, but what does system thinking actually means? First of all, and very important, seeing the big picture. So looking at the whole system, instead of just focusing on one part of the farming, like growing crops or raising animals, system thinking considers how everything on the farm works together. And it also involves that we acknowledge that problems and solutions, and in that case, pest problems and pest control as a solution, are not isolated, but part of the system as a whole. And that considers how nature and people, animals, and also technology are all interacting. And this goes hand in hand with the fact that everything is interconnected. Recognizing that different elements of the agricultural system are all connected and influence each other. For example, changes in soil health can impact crop growth, which in turn affects the pest populations. So by applying system thinking in pest control, farmers can actually develop more sustainable and resilient farming practices, focusing on the prevention of the pest problem. And you can see the classical integrated pest management triangle on the right-hand side. And the prevention actually lies in the green part. And so focusing more on the prevention and not necessarily on the controlling. And why is this important? I don't really want to talk too much about this, as this was already the topic of previous discussions here already. But I just want to mention, very often the focus is on controlling the pest only, replacing one toxic pesticide with a less toxic one. So in integrated pest management, again, on the right-hand side, that would be the yellow and orange part in the picture. But that does not always work, because the crop is often very stressed in the system. Either there's not enough water, or there's a low soil fertility, or there are no natural enemies which can support the pest control. And the to toxic pesticides. So we really need to make sure that the system is in place for pest control with less pesticides. And very often alternatives like biopesticides or biocontrol are either not available in many countries, or they are by far too expensive, and farmers will
Natasha, is Silke cutting out, or is it me?
I think she is. Silke, would you mind perhaps turning off your video? That might help.
Okay, we seem to have lost her. Silke, we lost you for a bit. Maybe you can turn your video off. Just, I'm not sure if the connectivity on your side is an issue. So we lost you for a bit.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Great. Okay, so next slide, please. And there are various, next slide. Yeah. And there are various concepts that include in some way system thinking. And I just want to name three. The one is, and I was just choosing those ones because very often there is a little bit of confusion about these different concepts. The first one is regenerative agriculture. That is basically just a farming practice, and it focuses on improving primarily soil health and includes aspects of biodiversity, water management, but also carbon sequestration. So that's a very important part in regenerative agriculture. It often involves principles like crop rotation, cover cropping, minimal tillage, to regenerate soil fertility and mitigate climate change impacts. So that's the focus of regenerative agriculture. The next one is agroecology. Agroecology is a process, a transformation, and that goes beyond just the farming practice as the regenerative agriculture. It also includes livelihood, for example. So it's a much broader concept that integrates farming practices, science and technology, and also social, political, and economic aspects. And very often it's also seen as a social movement with a goal to create farming systems that are ecologically sound, socially just, and economically viable. Next slide, please. And the last one concept I want to talk about and I want to focus on is the permaculture. And permaculture, one can see as a design system. So that's very important. The design is very important in permaculture. A lot of effort goes into this design of a farming system. And with that, the farmer aims to create self-sustaining agricultural systems that basically mimic the resilience and the productivity of a natural ecosystem. So we try to mimic nature, basically. So it might take some time to design the system, the farming system, but at the end, it should be self-sustaining. So it doesn't require a lot of intervention in our case today, pest control, but also fertilizing and digging. And for the design, the farmer focuses on very holistic design principles. I can't go into detail in all these principles, but for example, it includes observation and interacting with nature. It includes diversity and integration, and it wants to maximize the efficiency of the system while minimizing, on the other hand, the waste. So it's a thoughtful planning process while utilizing all the resources. Next slide, please. So let's dive a bit deeper into the permaculture concept and see how permaculture can help in pest control. So permaculture is based on 12 principles, but as I said, I won't mention all of them. The two most important ones for pest control are, on the one hand, value the resources like soil, water, and make sure your plants are healthy, so they are more resistant against pests and diseases. And the second important principle is value diversity and a balanced ecosystem. So coming back to the first one, soil health is a central part of permaculture, as soil is connected to basically all the other elements in crop production. So healthy plants need healthy soil. And methods are amongst many others like composting, mulching. I think we all know these methods to also increase soil fertility, but also soil health. Cover cropping, intercropping, also very important, intercropping with perennials, so plants who grow longer than 1 year, to permanently cover the soil. And that's where the name comes from, permaculture, permanent agriculture. And a good example is, for example, the pigeon pea. You can see the picture on the right-hand side, as it is a nitrogen fixer and attracts a lot of natural enemies and pollinators. And generally, including nitrogen fixers in the system is a very good idea. And Africa has a lot of nitrogen fixing trees and shrubs. So to make sure that the soil is healthy for a healthy plant. A healthy plant needs also water, which is rare in many rain-fed agricultural systems, as we all know, especially in dry lands. And well-designed water management techniques are included into the design as well in permaculture, with the concept to slow down the water, to let the water sink into the soil and to store the water. But there's, again, not enough time to go into detail, but you can always contact me for further insights if you are interested in this. And the second principle, value diversity, means designing the system with a good plant diversity and not monocropping. So that also means decentralized production. So not only one large area with one crop, but break it down to fragmented areas so that pest outbreaks are less often and are less risky. Also include companion plants that repel the pest or attract natural enemies, and also use trap crops to trap pests. And a well-known example is the push and pull method in maize production. So I don't know if you know about that, but it's basically Napier grass growing around the maize field, which pulls the pest out of the maize field and traps it, as the pest can't reproduce in the Napier grass. And then you have desmodium in between the maize that repels or pushes the pest out of the field. And at the same time, desmodium is a nitrogen fixer and provides the maize with nitrogen. So we need more systems like this in preventing pest outbreaks. Last and next slide, please. And other principles that shift the mindset towards system thinking in permaculture are, for example, observe and interact. That means be in the field and observe what is happening. Where is the water flowing when it rains? How is the sun moving? Do the plants grow at the right spot? When is the pest coming in? Is there maybe a relationship between the wrong spot and the pest attack? Also, another example, do tomatoes maybe experience more pest attacks during low rainy season, during high rainy season? Maybe it's time to change that. So seasonal farming is also very important to avoid pest attacks. And there's also another principle, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. So that means that we should provide elements so that the pest can be regulated by itself, by the system, through companion planting, through natural biodiversity, etc. And if there is an outbreak, acknowledge it, and as a feedback nature gives you. So it means something is wrong with the system. And then you should act, change different elements in the system to improve the system so that less pest attacks are happening. And last but not least, integrate rather than segregate. So this basically repeats all other aspects I mentioned already. See the post-pest problem as part of the system and acknowledge that everything is connected. And with that, I would like to hand over to Andrea for the first question. And I hope you were able to follow me. The internet connection somehow broke down in between.
Thank you, Silke. Thank you very much. Yes, even though you did break down a bit, your presentation was very clear. And although it's a very complex systems approach, you really gave some very clear elements and the important elements. So we now ask all of you to move into the chat. Some of you have found the chat already, where you've been introducing yourself, and we would like you to think about this first question and really to respond to it. Have there been any efforts within your work or sector to shift away from reliance on pesticides? And if you could give examples from your sector and your countries, how this shift has been done. And also, if you have any questions for Silke, please do post it in the chat. She will respond to them. So Silke, I guess you can turn your video on if you want to try with your connection, but you're welcome to speak to the comments and the questions that you see. So some are already coming. I'm trying to see, we had one. So there are some comments if you want to go ahead and respond to those. Sheridith from Guyana has given you a response.
Can you maybe read it out? Because I can't see it now. I just see the last two responses.
Okay, yeah, I'm just, you have to keep filtering. Sometimes it's easier to pop out your chat as well. You can actually enlarge it on your screen if that makes it easier. But yes, let me find it.
Yeah. But I see one comment says, in South Africa, there's a very big interest in regenerative farming, where farmers try to use more natural and organic means to protect their crops. That's great. But then again, you know, regenerative farming is just based on, is a farming technique, and agroecology goes even further, and permaculture as well. So it's very important for me to that you understand the differences in these concepts. But again, like regenerative farming also includes system thinking already.
So the comment from Sheridith from Guyana was that they have a number of non-pesticide methods for dealing with pests, which include traps like sticky boards or color sticky pads, hormone traps, natural repellents such as flowers and plants, like you referred to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also very good. But then also remember the first or second slide was just focusing also on we shouldn't forget prevention. All these methods you were just mentioning are like sort of methods to control. So if the pest is there, which is also very important, but we tend to neglect to make sure that the plant is really healthy. And that's what permaculture is also about, to really make sure that the soil health, the diversity is there, that the natural support to control the pest is there, so that the pest is not actually being a problem or turn out to be a problem.
So Jessica from South Africa made an interesting comment. I'm not sure if you saw that. She was saying she's not in the pesticide industry, but at the workplace, they have interior plants which are cleaned and serviced frequently as a means of pest management by interior landscaping services companies.
Okay.
And she goes on to give you other, but I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Because there's so many comments coming in. I mean, you can, they are not really questions, right? So these are all basically comments which you can all read yourself. I'm just trying to see which ones are.
These are responses to the first question. So people are coming up with suggestions of how they're shifting from pesticide use.
Ah, yeah, okay. So questions, I can't see any questions.
No questions, just comments. So Tom, who's in the retail industry in South Africa, said we are heavily focused on regenerative agriculture, introducing Vision Zero. So the intent is to have LOD on all our crops sold. Sorry, I'm missing what LOD is.
I also don't know. But yeah, and you know, within the integrated pest management, you focusing first on the soil. That's great. And we have a major issue with resistance to pesticides. So we also heavily focused on highlighting our findings along with driving biological alternatives. Yeah, so I mean, like, you know, that's another problem. Even if the pesticide is there and we use it, there is the problem of resistance. This is a very big problem, especially when we talk about herbicides and glyphosate. There's so many weeds already which are resistant, especially in South Africa, because the glyphosate use is so intense.
Yeah, and we just used heavily amounts of glyphosate in the Vaal River for the lettuce, the invasive water lettuce species. And I see that Silendile has responded saying that for invasive alien plant control, biocontrol species for water hyacinth. The problem is when you do both, when you spray glyphosate and you do biocontrol, then it's problematic because the glyphosate will wipe out the biocontrol.
Mm-hmm. And I see the comment from a gift from Nigeria saying that there is effort implementing integrated pest management, but also permaculture design trainings are going on. That is also very, very important. Also, like, you know, including agroecology or permaculture. My experience in Kenya was that there is hardly any focus in the education and at universities training of extension officers or farmers in this kind of way of really system thinking and looking at the whole system and looking at the prevention. So there's very often the focus on the control. So yeah, it's very good to see that in Nigeria there's permaculture training going on, and I believe I'm in a permaculture network throughout whole Africa, and it's really increasing. There's so much interest in this kind of designing, you know, putting a lot of effort in the design, but then at the end you're creating a happy system with less problems. So yeah, it's good to see that.
is a question for you, and then also if you would like to comment on the poll, because we'll then move on to the next poll. And perhaps when you're done presenting, you might also like to put the link in the chat to the Permaculture Network in Africa, if people can join. So the question is from Ludwig. How do we minimize government from supplying all these farmers? So minimize government, I'm assuming, with pesticides. There are farmers who are receiving grants. So how do we prevent or minimize government from supplying farmers with pesticides?
That's basically, yeah, I mean, training the farmers and giving them other options, other solutions, you know. Very often the only solution comes either from extension officer or from the pesticide shop dealers. And obviously, as long as the farmer doesn't have any alternative, he or she will be still reliable on these distributions of pesticides. So one really needs to look at the training and giving solutions.
So if we just flash back for 1 second to the previous poll, you can maybe comment on that while people vote on the other one. So what systems thinking approaches in agriculture are you familiar with?
Yeah, so the most important one which comes up is agroecology and also agroforestry, which is also a type of agroecology, which is great. Many do organic farming or include organic farming. I see regenerative farming, adaptive management. Composting is a method, I guess. So it's not really a system, but it's a method for the system. But I think the most important ones which are popping up are permaculture, or permaculture is coming in now as well, is agroecology. And that's also, yeah, really promising that many of you already use or are familiar with agroecological terms in terms of pest control. Great. Yeah, so I just presented a couple of permaculture principles, and we just wanted to find out, you know, if you ever apply these already to shift away from the reliance to side. You're not so much familiar yet with the principles, and maybe it went a little bit too fast to go through all these. So I see one uses already diversity and one is using the integrated rather segregating principle too. No, answers come in. Yeah, so most of you actually looking at the integration, so looking really at an integrated system, which is per se the system thinking. Yeah, great. Okay. Some using value diversity.
There's another question for you from Noemi. At the policy level, what are the biggest barriers against increasing the scale of farmers using alternative approaches in farming and pest management? It's a big question.
That's a very big question. And that also depends on which level we're looking at pest management, right? So, you know, if we look at the pest control level, that's a different story, but we're now looking at the prevention level. And the biggest barrier in that is the financing, I guess, for the prevention, because we have degraded soils. We live in many farmers live in dryland areas. So water is a big issue, and it needs a little bit of an investment to basically regenerate the system first. And I think that is one of the biggest barriers. And it's also a long-term kind of approach and not a short-term control with less toxic pesticides or biopesticides, which might work in the short term more efficiently, but you always have to redo it. So long-term changes are very difficult to sort of put into policies because it's not an immediate result at the end for the politicians. And I think these are the two biggest barriers.
So there's an interesting comment. I realize that we are at the end of question 1, but there's an interesting comment from Tabiso that I mentioned the vol spraying of glyphosate, that the government is looking at using alternative herbicides together with biocontrol. I don't know if you want to comment on that. I mean, my understanding is that you can't use herbicides and biocontrol together.
I'm not so sure. I mean, I used to work for Department of Water Affairs in South Africa, and 10, 15 years ago, there was already that problem in the Vaal Dam, not Vaal Dam, but some other dam close to the government department. And they used biocontrol. They used, but I can't remember what it was, but it was a kind of a natural grazer. I think it was some kind of snail. And they were using it together with the glyphosate, but I'm not 100% sure what has been done now. So I'm not into that kind of topic anymore.
Well, that's probably why we still have a problem, because they're using biocontrol with the herbicide. So it's annihilating the biocontrol. So thank you very much, Silke. We are going to move on to question 2. I don't know if there's any last comment you want to make before I hand over to Stephanie?
No, not from my side. Thanks.
So thank you very much. And you're welcome to have a look at the comments in the chat and keep responding to those as we continue. So Stephanie, over to you now. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. If you can introduce yourself and then take us through to question 2.
Thank you, Andrea. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank
Great,
you.
Thanks. And thanks, Silke, as well. I was hoping that my presentation would follow seamlessly and pick up some of the themes that you talked about without having seen your presentation before. And yes, I think it does. So I think that's really great that I can now show some sort of practical examples of methods used in a specific country and a specific cropping context. My name is Stephanie Williamson. I'm staff scientist at Pesticide Action Network UK. I've got a master's in integrated pest management, and then I did my PhD in biological sciences, looking at patterns of pesticide use by African smallholders and some of the problems associated with that. I work very closely here with my colleagues in Ethiopia in particular. We've got several projects there on pesticide reduction and agroecology. And I also do quite a bit of technical support to supply chains. So, for example, Better Cotton Initiative, Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade, those kind of standards, as well as in UK we have work where we're trying to kind of work with UK retailers to start introducing more and better IPM in their supply chains and focus on specific HHPs for phase out. So I'm going to talk, thanks for the opportunity to Cape Town for being able to talk about the experiences from our vegetable IPM project with Pan Ethiopia in the Central Rift Valley. Next slide, please. So first of all, just a little bit of background as to why we began this project 6 years ago, which was to try out some IPM alternatives with the aim of really drastically cutting the level of HHPs used around Lake Ziway, which is one of the country's most important vegetable producing areas. Pan Ethiopia, and actually quite a lot of other Ethiopian stakeholders, had long been concerned about very high levels of pesticide use in the area, both by smallholders and more larger commercial scale growers there. When we started this project, our baseline survey in 2018 showed that around 20% of farmers and 73% of workers recalled at least one poisoning incident for themselves or a family member in the last 12 months. Also, obviously, risks to consumers who are eating produce that's had heavy pesticide treatment, drinking water concerns, lake fish as well. Fishing is an important part of the livelihood around there. And also the kind of patterns of pesticide use, the very high frequency you can see there, sometimes over 20 times a season. Many of the handling practices as well pose high environmental risks. The Ziwai area, the lake and the wetlands around there are internationally valuable and biodiverse areas. So we want to protect the biodiversity there. And also, you know, we know from the hazard profiles of a lot of the pesticides used by farmers in Ethiopia that those can really hammer beneficial organisms that provide ecosystem services. Pollinators are one, natural enemies of pests are another, not to mention all the beneficial organisms living below ground. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk about the project where we were trying out in vegetables this method called the food spray method to enhance biological control. Pan Ethiopia and ourselves had worked successfully with cotton farmers in the southern part of Ethiopia to introduce this method to get more natural enemies into farmers' fields. That had been really successful, and those small-scale cotton farmers had been able to completely eliminate pesticide use while increasing their yields and getting more income. So we knew it worked in cotton. Would it work in vegetables? Just a little bit of very brief explanation about the food spray method. It has three essential components. First of all, you need to make sure there is some habitat in or around the field to serve as a welcoming home for natural enemies, what we call farmers' friends in our farmer training work. So in vegetables, what we've started doing in this project, so we began with using maize as little habitat strips or borders, but actually we found that alfalfa legume works better. Pretty easy to sow, to use. You can use it as a fodder crop. It's a legume, so it's putting nitrogen back into the soil. Bees love it as well. So lots of good things to tick there. You can't really see very well in that photo, but that is an onion field in the dark green, and around the lighter green around the edge are alfalfa borders growing very nicely. A really effective, nice home for natural enemies, which can then go in and feed on pests in the onion. The second method is the food spray itself. So this is a food supplement, the odors of which attract natural enemies, mainly predator insects, into the crop. The odor plume mimics the kind of scents that are given off by sucking pests feeding on plant foliage. So the predators think, I could smell our prey, so they'll come into your crop if you've sprayed the food spray on it, and then they start foraging for prey, which is what you want them to be doing. And then the third point is, you've put all this work to bringing natural enemies into your crop, but there's no point if you're then just going to kill them off again by using broad spectrum insecticides. So that third point is equally important, is to really avoid use of broad spectrum insecticides, eliminate if possible, so that you can maximize the biological contribution from your natural enemies. I'm not going to go into any details about the food spray methods. We have a information, including a full training manual, on our website, which you can see the link there. This one was based on the dilution of waste brewer's yeast, so fairly easy for farmers to filter and dilute and spray on foliage. Next slide, please. So just very quickly to say that, you know, we weren't just using the food spray method. That helped build a nice foundation of natural biological control, but with IPM we need many other methods as well, many tactics, and here you can see the kind of principles from which we drew different IPM practices, and they align very nicely with the FAO definition of IPM and also the ethos of farmer field school training. And what Pan Ethiopia were aimed to do in their program is to empower farmers to gain both knowledge and skills and confidence to start using agroecological pest management in their fields. The next one, please. So this is very busy, this slide. Don't worry, you don't have to read it all. It lists a total of 24 different IPM practices that Pan Ethiopia has introduced over the years in our FFS training program. Some of these are actually quite small modifications to farmers' usual agronomic practices. For example, 3.5 is wider spacing of transplants to improve air circulation so that you make the crop rows less susceptible to disease. Others were totally new to the farmers in the Ziway area, the food spray method itself, but also things like sanitary pruning of older tomato leaves, which means you're taking out disease spores out of the crop, you're taking out tutor leaf miner. These are all really useful things that can help bring down levels of disease and pest and reduce the survival to the next season as well. Baking soda applications, which can help delay the onset of disease, is also something that was new to farmers, new to us trying it as well, actually. On the right-hand side, you can see the percentage farmer uptake of these different practices. That data is from a small survey that we did in 2022. And we're pleased to see really high uptake of many of these practices. Things like the habitat borders, which is great. Things like more careful transplanting. So you're not starting your growing season with a load of really stressed seedlings. Thorough cleanup after harvest, all really important cultural practices which often get neglected in IPM programs, I think. And the final slide then, please, which, you know, what were we able to therefore achieve in terms of pesticide reduction? Again, this is from the same survey data. You can see that we got overall a really impressive reduction of 73% in synthetic insecticide use. We got a really welcome 96% reduction in organophosphate products, which were the ones most closely linked to poisoning incidents in our baseline survey and earlier data. And we've also seen farmers shifting to actively choosing non-chemical treatments, either home-prepared neem seed extract, or there is one commercial neem product available in that area. And as a last resort, when insecticide may have to be used, farmers are now choosing to buy the less toxic products, Tracer, for example, which includes spinosad, which is quite a lot less harmful to natural enemies than many of the other broad spectrum insecticides they've been using. An interesting finding, and I think very relevant for our discussion today, is that the commercial neem product and Tracer, the spinosad product, are actually a bit more expensive than other insecticides. However, you know, our project has shown that at farmer level, this isn't necessarily a problem, because by using a range of IPM methods, you're really helping farmers to reduce their application frequency overall, and therefore that makes it easier for them to afford less toxic products, even if they may cost slightly more per bottle. I don't have time to show the economic data, but I want to finish by saying that trained farmers are able to maintain or even increase crop yields and quality by using these sets of IPM practices, and also making gains in net income because they're saving on pesticide costs. So, conclusion from our project: phasing out HHPs by phasing in agroecological alternatives is totally feasible with small-scale vegetable producers in Ziway. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that. And you've presented a lot of detail within a short period of time. And I think, you know, it is important. We have had separate discussions on highly hazardous pesticides, and the reminder that, you know, we're not always talking about all pesticides. We're talking about really a small group of very hazardous ones, and really needing to have alternatives and alternative approaches and processes. So thank you for highlighting examples. So we want all of you now to go into the chat and describe what actions specific stakeholders could take to enable farmers to benefit more from the pest control contribution by, for example, natural enemies. So I see there's already some discussion going on. So Stephanie, I don't know if you want to respond to some of those.
Regulators need to limit harmful pesticides. Absolutely. But that's also a confidence thing, I think, for them. And what, you know, what we found is it's really difficult. There's no one-stop shop, no platform globally, really, where regulators can go and look for IPM alternatives for a specific HHP that they would like to withdraw its approval for. There's the whole IPM information world, but that's not really sort of categorized in terms of, well, this would work as an alternative. So I think there's lots more that we could do. That seems to be a real need. And of course, like Silke said, it's not just replace something out of a bottle with something else out of a bottle, or even replace an HHP with just one IPM method. It's bringing them all together.
So in the interest of time, we have posted the poll as well, but feel free to continue with looking at the comments. Thank you.
Yeah, benefits of pest control by natural enemies. That, yeah, most farmers are often not aware of them, but as soon as you start going into the field and showing them practically, they really get it. That can be often one of their key motivations to start changing practices and thinking about going down a more agroecological route. And there are really nice things that you could do in the field. No one has to be an expert. You don't have to be able to identify even to family, let alone to species level. You've just got to get to know, become familiar with, you know, things like lacewings or hoverflies. And I'd also say a lot of extension staff need a bit of support on that. Our experience has been that extension staff have all done IPM in theory at uni, but often they have no practical experience in putting it into place in the field. So I think there's a lot we can do on helping extension staff upskill in those areas. Yep, I agree with Vera. Hi, Vera. Comments there. Absolutely. Yeah, and Silke demonstration farms. Yeah. and actually getting farmers actively involved in observing and collecting data and discussing it. I think it's not just sort of standing at the side watching, but get them actively involved in the discussions, and that helps build their ownership. Great, we've got loads of methods coming up here. I'm struggling to read what the 14 is. I think that's the text underneath is so small I can't read it on my laptop.
I'll read it for you. It's
thank you.
leaving some natural
Yeah,
vegetation
yeah.
at field edges.
Yeah. And I think we've found with the food spray method, deliberately sowing small strips as well can really boost that. And obviously, if something like alfalfa is a useful product for the farmer to use. So sometimes farmers can get, I don't want to leave this natural vegetation. It might be weedy. It might encourage more pests. Whereas if you put in a slightly more designed habitat strip, things like sunflowers, in cotton, maize works really well, then at least farmers get a useful end product as well out of it. Yeah, Silendili's point, very much about government departments and private entities sharing information, having symposiums. Absolutely, we need a lot more of that. And Tabiso, agroeconomic department. Yeah, I mean, I always find it frustrating when looking at trying to look for IPM alternatives. You look online and there are lists of methods. I mean, my first point of call is always the Plant-Wise knowledge database. Cabby's Plant-Wise program online has great information, but it's sort of quite big picture. So for aphids in cotton, you could use XYZ methods. What's often needed to help work with farmers in a particular area is some sort of validation trials. Let's try a set of these methods together. How much does it cost? How much labor? What do we get in terms of yield and quality? What are savings we maybe make on inputs? That kind of stuff I think is really, really useful to do as a community of practice. Policy frameworks that prioritize conservation and enhancement of natural enemies. Yes, please. I mean, we've got a new pesticide reduction target in the Convention on Biodiversity. We've now got the start of the Global Alliance on HHP phase out. We've got, as Silke mentioned, the new recommendation from the United Nations Environment Assembly. So that we've got policy hooks to actually persuade policy makers and funders as well to say, let's put this into practice. And here's one of the ways you could do it would be, materials and training programs, videos on get to know about those get to learn to love the natural enemies in your field, those kind of things. Findili, yeah, lower import tax for green alternatives, absolutely. Better and more streamlined registration processes for safer products, biopesticides and other biorationals. Some countries are great on this. Kenya's got a huge long list of registered biopesticides. Neighboring Ethiopia, almost nothing for smallholders. So there's a lot of work that regulators and other government decision makers could do there. Yeah, indigenous knowledge, absolutely. That's part. Thanks, Silvani. Nice to see you online. Yeah, lots could be done there. I mean, we're learning, as you know, even though Plan Ethiopia, we've been promoting organic and agroecological, but there's always lots to learn from farmers. Particularly, you know, if I had a nice example in cotton actually, where, you know, with my IPM hat on, you say, don't leave your ratoon cotton beyond the initial growing season, because otherwise you can get loads of bollworms surviving. But actually, we found out from the small scale cotton farmers in part of Pan Ethiopia's project area that actually the local varieties that they do leave as ratoon cotton are really drought resistant. Okay, they don't give the biggest yield, but they give something, and they give farmers some cash income halfway through the year as well. So rather than going in and imposing don't ever use ratoon cotton, instead the team there is now working to say what pest management practices could you therefore incorporate into that ratoon cotton, so you end up with less bollworm problems.
I don't know if you want to comment on Dina's statement about organic or biopesticides being more expensive than synthetic ones, making less accessible to small-scale farmers. I mean, I think this goes to the point about the systems approach, but if you'd like to respond to that.
Well, it's not always the case. I mean, I know certain states in India, they've got good university departments that produce biopesticides and have link-ups with farmer groups to be able to enable those farmers to get access to products that, you know, at an affordable cost. I think if the issue is, if you just look at the price per bottle, some of the safer alternatives and biopesticides are sometimes a bit more expensive. But if you're not thinking in that context of, well, actually, by using my many other IPM methods, cultural practices, encouraging biological control naturally, I'm able to really reduce how many times I have to go in and do a direct treatment. And so if I'm doing far fewer and saving all that money on pesticides, well, actually, maybe when I do have to put something in, then maybe I can afford that slightly more expensive biorational product.
So I don't know if you'd like to comment on what you see on the screen in terms of how aware our agriculture extension staff in your country about natural enemies and why it's important for agricultural extension officers to be aware of this.
Yeah, I mean that's the highest one is the middle one, that some awareness, but really kind of not sure how to make practical use. Again, this is very much a confidence thing. I think that, you know, most extension staff want to work with farmers to reduce reliance on pesticides, but they don't always have the skills, the experience, the confidence to do that. And if you're not confident, then you kind of tend to resort by default to, oh, well, we better apply that pesticide then. Yeah, I think we could do a lot more really interactive, practical, useful, fun participatory learning with our extension staff on natural enemies and how to work with farmers. We have information about that in some FAO manuals. We have information that Pan UK has produced as well. We'd be very happy to share some of those resources with anybody in the group. Yeah, government subsidies for biopesticides instead of pesticides and fertilizers. Absolutely, Silke. I think there might be a few places where that's been done, but often that's kind of sometimes a bit easier to do at provincial level within a country than make it national level.
So there is a request for the information that you just mentioned, which you can put in the chat, I think when Alex is talking. And then Ludwig's comment about this information not being in the curriculum. I'm assuming he's talking about the agro extension officer's curriculum. And that's a very valid point in terms of needing to get this more technical information on alternatives, natural enemies, etc., into the curriculum.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as Pan UK, we would love to partner up with some people to develop a sort of kind of generic curriculum module on making practical use of natural enemies for ag extension staff.
And I think that's a nice note to end on. Would you like to make any concluding points before we move on to Alex?
I don't think so. Thanks very much for all the really good comments and questions. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. You've given a lot of food for thought, and the discussion will continue in the chat. So we will go to our third question now, and background from Alex. And I think this is really important because we've been talking a lot about agriculture, but we don't just have pest issues in the agricultural sector. So Alex, over to you. Thanks for taking the time. If you can introduce yourself and carry on with your discussion.
Thanks, Andrea, and hi everyone. So yes, I'm an agroecologist at Pesticide Action Network UK with Stephanie, and I did my PhD on rodent ecology and management in the Philippines, and since then I've worked at the University of Reading on rodent pest management, and then at the International Rice Research Institute, again in the Philippines and across Southeast Asia, working on crop management and pest management as well. And more recently, I'm working in Africa, particularly in Benin and Ethiopia, looking at alternatives to HHPs in cotton and vegetables, and doing various studies looking at the impacts of pesticides on farmer health and the environment. But yeah, today I'm going to present about alternatives to HHPs for rodent management in urban and domestic environments. And this is basically a summary of a literature review that we've just had accepted for the Journal of Pest Science, but it is not yet published. So hope to sort of draw out some of the main points, because we don't have much time to go through the results of the paper today, but hopefully enough to give you some information, and then we'll have further discussion after. So next slide, please. So there are numerous chemical rodenticides out there that are used to manage rodent pests, but these can be grouped into three main categories. So these include the acute or fast-acting rodenticides that have a very rapid action and cause immediate effects and very quick mortality. And it's for that reason some of these are actually prone to elicit bait shyness among rodents, because if they just consume a sublethal dose, they will learn to avoid going near that bait or rodenticide in the future. Some of these include zinc phosphide or aluminium phosphide, for example. The next group include first-generation anticoagulants. So these are blood-thinning agents that reduce blood clotting and lead to internal hemorrhaging. And these were developed in the 50s, and because they take several days to develop symptoms, the rodents cannot associate the symptoms with the bait. So these had initial success, but then because they were intensively used in urban areas, rodents quickly developed resistance to them. So as a consequence, second-generation anticoagulants were developed, which are a lot more potent, a lot more toxic, and they only require a single feed for the rodents to consume a lethal dose, whereas the first-generation anticoagulants require the rodents to feed on them several times over several days. And examples of these second-generation anticoagulants include brodifacoum and difenacum, but some rodent populations in some areas have also developed resistance against these. But overall, the majority of rodenticides that are available are all HHPs, because they are all vertebrate toxicants, and thus they are all highly hazardous to humans as well as vertebrate wildlife, and because they're in the same group of organism as rodents. So because of this, we need to pay particular attention to this group of chemical or pesticide. In particular, we need to be concerned about zinc phosphide and aluminium phosphide. So these are of particular concern because they are highly toxic and they have a rapid time to elicit symptoms and even death within 24 hours. And because there is no antidote and such a short time to introduce treatment, there is a very high case fatality. So there are frequently reported fatalities from accidental and deliberate poisonings across the world. And of particular concern are powder formulations of zinc phosphide that are, for example, 80% concentration, and small 3-gram tablets of aluminium phosphide. Second generation anticoagulants are also highly toxic because only a single dose is required. There's a little bit more time to treat accidental poisonings of second generation anticoagulants, but that's only if the patient is able to receive treatment in time. And then as well as this, they have major non-target effects on wildlife due to the long half-lives and the potential for bioaccumulation in the tissues and organs of non-target wildlife. First generation anticoagulants are slightly less hazardous than the second generation ones, but because of the development of resistance, there are issues to be aware with when using these. And then of course there are also illegally used organophosphates being used in certain areas as rodent management, and these are also highly hazardous pesticides. And for example, aldicarb, which has been used for rodent control in South Africa as well as Brazil. So these are also something to be aware of. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the majority of chemical rodenticides are HHPs and only a very few are not HHPs. So we do need to avoid simply replacing one chemical for another. The ones that are not HHPs, either not available or limited in their use. So these include carbon dioxide, which is used as a dry ice to fumigate burrows. And as far as I'm aware, they're only available in North America, and they may not be useful in hot countries due to the more rapid melting of the ice. Norbamide is an acute rodenticide in which a prodrug formulation has been developed that basically delays the onset of symptoms to overcome bait shyness. This is not yet commercially available, but I understand there is a process in place to develop this for commercial sale. And then alpha chlorelose, you might have heard of, is a rodenticide mainly used in northern climates because it is an anesthetic and it only works at temperatures below 15 degrees, and it is only effective against mice, but it is also toxic against humans, so we do need to be concerned about this one. So as mentioned, there are a number of challenges with using chemical rodenticides, and rodenticide treatment alone is unlikely to achieve effective control because rodents are able to adapt, they're able to move long distances. So over the long term, rodents are quickly able to overcome treatment. So we need to move away from current levels of rodenticide reliance. Next slide, please. So fortunately, there are a number of non-chemical alternatives that exist. So these include cultural control. So we heard from Silke about the need to focus on preventative measures. This is also true for urban rodent management. So this, by preventing rodents access to buildings or access to grain stores, you prevent one, issues within households, and two, the availability of food for rodent populations to build up. Sanitation is also important to remove access to food and also water and burrowing or harborage habitat. And we see a picture on the right with an example of a grain store that was developed by farmers in Ethiopia, in which this prevents access to rodents, and this was developed with a group called Meta. And these sort of adaptations are occurring all over the world, and so it's important to support farmers or householders to develop such structures or access structures to help reduce rodent access to their food stores. Physical control includes trapping, and there are various methods of traps, types of traps, but if traps are made of sufficient quality and if they're put out at the right place, at the right time, and in the right way, they can be very effective. And Andrea's group have had a very successful study in which traps were distributed among urban poor communities, and they were very successful at reducing the rodent population and reducing use of pesticides. And one thing to note, there are sometimes concerns about the animal welfare of using such traps, but there are groups in Europe looking at testing different types of traps to evaluate how effective they are, at trapping the rodents and killing them quickly, which is good to control them and also good to reduce suffering. So there are guidelines now available by a group called NeoChem Road, and I'll drop a link in the chat because I didn't share that previously. There's an organization called the University Federation of Animal Welfare that provide quite a detailed list of information about welfare on different types of traps and also chemical methods. But in order to have the greatest success in the long term, it's important to have an integrated approach, which considers the environmental, ecological, and socioeconomic factors. So very similar to what we've heard from Silke about systems thinking in agriculture. In urban environments in particular, rodent management requires cooperations between local authorities, communities, and pest control authorities. And community participation is also vital in rural communities because rodents are able to move around from house to house. Next slide, please. So I'm running out of time, but I have a very quick case study that we do cover in our paper. This was a case study from Brazil, where a group in Salvador trialed an integrated rodent management program in an urban slum area to improve rodent management following unsuccessful campaigns of using chemical rodenticide use only. And this program involved using a combination of a chemical-based intervention using only a rodenticide for a week, an educational intervention involving educational campaigns to the residents about sanitation, and a local government infrastructural intervention that involved covering sewers and providing pavements to reduce nesting or burrowing habitat for rodents, as you can see in the image there. So they looked at 3 different valleys. 2 valleys involved all 3 interventions, and 1 valley involved only the 2 bottom ones without any chemicals. Next slide, please. So to quickly show you the results. So on the left of the bar in the middle, we see the rodent infestation rates for those 3 valleys before the intervention. The brown bar in the middle is when the intervention was introduced. And then on the right, we see the rodent infestation levels in those 3 valleys after the infestation. And each time series point was conducted every 4 months. And what we see is following the intervention, there was a huge decrease in rodent infestation from 70% down to 30%. So this showed this integrated approach was a lot more successful than a chemical-based approach only. And that also, the 2 methods without the chemical approach produced the same results as including a chemical approach amongst them. So it seemed the chemical approach did not provide much of a greater benefit. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, So there are several severe hazards posed by rodents. So we thus need to move away from the current levels of rodenticide reliance and move towards more integrated and ecologically based approaches. And we identified the following policy recommendations. So one is to restrict availability, and we suggest to, as a minimum, ban the sale and production of 3-gram aluminium phosphate tablet formulations, as has been successfully conducted in India and more recently in Nepal, as well as high concentration zinc phosphide powder formulations that are high risk and unnecessary, because zinc phosphide only needs to be presented to rodents in a 2.5% formulation. So we can really reduce the hazard by making only low percentage formulations available, and then reducing the availability of these formulations or any phosphide formulations for household use due to their high toxic nature. Number two, we suggest to implement enforcement restrictions, especially around illegal street trade of both banned pesticides as well as non-registered or illegal organophosphates. Improve the availability of less hazardous alternatives by subsidizing traps, for example, and providing educational campaigns. Promote and invest in preventative measures, including community action, which is key to prevent rodent population buildup and is necessary to avoid relying on reactive approaches based on rodenticide use, and then strengthen research on less hazardous alternatives, and especially on integrated approaches that need to be adapted for local context. Now, that covers everything. Thank you, Andrea, and sorry for running over time a bit.
Thanks so much, Alex. I mean, it's a topic of discussion on its own. You talked about just the use of highly hazardous pesticides that are legally registered for rodent control. But the research we've been doing is on highly hazardous pesticides like turbophos and eldercarb that are being used illegally for rodent control, mostly because of many of the issues you raised, the resistance, the fact that there are so many rats, there continue to be so many. So thank you very much for that. And I'm hoping that there are many questions already being posted in the chat in response to the third question. So in your country, what successful non-chemical techniques have you come across to manage rodent pests in urban or domestic areas? And so you will see already that there's some response, and I'll let you comment on those.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm sort of working from the bottom, so I might have missed some, but I see in Nigeria, a gift has mentioned that setting traps with poison bait is quite common. So actually, I haven't heard of that being done before, and I'm wondering why the need of using poison bait if you're trapping the rat anyway. So that would be interesting to hear why poison bait is being used, or is this just a sort of a technique that's just been adopted and it's just common now? But yeah, there's a question here. What would be your recommendation for controlling overpopulated informal settlements? So this where we have got situations with informal settlements, it's very important to bring in the government to manage such a program. It's crucial that they oversee any campaign and involve the community as much as possible. And we see the example from Brazil, where they've actually made investments in infrastructure development, and that may not be possible in informal settlements, but there may be other measures that they could take to support those rural and those poor communities. But yeah, very difficult to give a quick answer to that. Yes, a response from Iran talking about rodent-proofing buildings by sealing cracks and holes. That's very important. That's very useful at preventing rodents entering buildings, as well as access to harborage and food. And using snap traps. Yeah, I didn't mention. So I mentioned the study by Andrea's group using traps or distributing traps in urban urban communities, urban poor communities, but there are also several studies conducted across Asia and Africa showing how snap traps, and when used properly, and these studies were specially designed where they compared the use of traps versus the use of chemicals, but they all showed that the use of traps could easily replace chemical use, and they were very effective, and usually results showing that rodents could be completely eradicated when done on a regular basis. And the advantage with using traps is traps can be used continuously over several years, whereas the chemical approach, you have to keep purchasing the chemicals. But then this also comes back to the importance of using good quality traps. So there is now guidance now, and also there are assessments being conducted in Europe on different brands of traps to assess their quality. And so this is something that could be adopted in other countries as well. So what else have we got here? So some more very good advice on rodent management in Iran. I just looking there at the suggestion of ultrasonic devices. So there is sort of limited evidence on the effectiveness of ultrasonic devices. So I definitely welcome more studies to look into those. But definitely an option to be aware of. You're right. In Guyana, I see the use of sticky boards is used. They are less toxic, but there are now severe welfare concerns with sticky boards. So I'm just checking here. So so it talks about, so you mentioned about the benefits versus rodenticides, but in Europe now, the sticky boards have been banned, or at least in the UK. And those are for reasons of welfare, and they although the non-target risks may be lower, but the actual effect on the rodents are deeply concerning, because the rodents sometimes takes days to die, and they're stuck on the trap, not able to move during that period. So it's quite horrific if you think about it. So it's something that we don't recommend. So here, Gift has mentioned that traps, sometimes when using traps, rodents are able to pick the bait and leave. So that's where the importance of the trap, good quality trap, is important, and how to set out a trap. So it's important to set the trap in a way where you ensure the best success rate. I'm going to post that website actually I had, because that also talks about recommendations on how to set traps. So I'll just put that there in the chat. So I'm missing the poll here. Okay, so just a quick look at the poll. So do you think rodents in urban domestic areas are being successfully managed? And so I see the majority are saying no. And that is likely because even though we have all these chemical rodenticides, they are not sufficient, especially if conducted in a solo manner. So there are much more effective techniques by using integrated approaches, and the most important is doing a preventative approach. I think we could move on to the next poll question, because I think that follows on from this one, if I remember right.
So this is an open-ended poll question. You just, again, need to go to menti.com and give some examples of how rodents have been successfully managed in your country. It would also be good to know what successful means.
Indeed. So this is one of the issues with any rodent control program. Often they're very short-lived, and rodents are able to quickly respond as soon as the program ends, especially if it's a chemical program. Whereas, yeah, if you're introducing well, I won't give further examples, and let's see what comes up in the chat. But yeah, so successful, we could hear about short-term successful stories or long-term. So yeah, but long-term would be especially interesting.
It would be interesting to know if Susan's example in Germany has been successful. So poster campaigns for calling for not throwing rubbish in the open and don't feed rats, etc. It'd be interesting to hear how successful that campaign was.
Andrew, I might have missed some comments or questions further up, but I'll just keep going down. There's lots coming in, so really interesting. Lots of sort of stories or suggestions on what's being done in their respective countries.
Yeah, there's the mention of, putting bird sticks in fields to allow birds of prey to rest and actually then look for rodents.
And I see a follow-up from Iran. So there was discussion that there were big problems of rat populations in Tehran, and then someone asked what methods are being used in that city or in cities in Iran, and it seems to be mainly chemicals. So even, yeah, that just proves the point that these chemical approaches are not effective.
So Susan says she's not sure how successful the campaign was, but is going to try and find out. That would be most useful. I see there's a few responses on the poll. Don't know if you want to respond to any of those.
Yeah.
And then we'll move on to, I think, do we have one more poll?
Okay, so it looks like the rodent trap with or without poison is successful. That was the example we heard earlier, I presume. Or yeah, be good to know if that's the same person or not. Costa Rica, so traps, predators, and sticks. Okay, so various methods have been successful.
So we're going to very quickly move on to the next poll because we only have a few minutes left. So what barriers are there to large non-scale chemical rodent control? Alex, I don't know if you want to sort of start off the conversation on that.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, yeah, it's really, so if we're talking large scale non-chemical control, what we're talking about is really an integrated method that could be, focus on the preventative measures, which is what is recommended, because you want to prevent a rodent population from building up in the first place. That's your best means of management. And then other methods could be related to trapping, so making traps more available or more affordable, or distribution of traps, and other measures to improve infrastructure or reduce rodent access or rodent proofing of buildings. So I think it'd be interesting to hear what are the barriers apart from financial ones, but could be political or other barriers. It'd be interesting to hear from you about that. Okay, so one suggestion is resistance to non-chemical control methods could be an issue. Yes, I think I can agree there with regards to traps, for example. So traps can learn, rodents can learn to avoid traps like they do with certain rodenticides. This is where it's good to combine trapping with other methods, for example, or to use different types of traps. So there are ways to overcome that. Lack of funding, for sure. I think that is definitely an issue there. Maybe a bit quicker to go through these yet.
Well, we've got 1 minute left, so I wonder if you just want to have any concluding statements, and participants can read the responses that are coming in.
Yes, I think, well, yeah, it was just something I was coming to earlier, really, which is the need for sort of a sustainable program, which is, I think, led by government, but we need to ensure that any sort of measures are continuous. Otherwise, rats are able to rebound or move from one area to another. So it's important for communities to work together to prevent sort of movement of rats from one area to another. But I see there's certainly a lot of good suggestions, a lot of very interesting feedback. And I think I probably should have given myself a lot more time to discuss this topic, because it sounds like it's really interesting, and there's a lot of good.
So no worries. We actually will have a digest. So everyone who has signed up for the Pesticide Network will receive the digest, which will be a summary, and will give the presenters an opportunity to respond to any comments or points in the polls that you may not have had time to respond to now. But I think also, Alex, this is something that we can come back to in a future discussion. I think this is a very important topic. Rodent control is a big issue. So I'd like to say thank you very much for your time and for sharing your thoughts, and also the work that you've been doing. I'd like to say thank you to Silke and Stephanie for their presentations as well, and really to encourage participants to reach out to the presenters. There's a lot of good work being done on alternatives and alternative processes and systems, and really it's, in an hour and a half, you can only just sort of whet the interest in the topic. So I really encourage everyone to reach out to the presenters. And thank you very much to all the participants for your active participation. Just to let you know that please go to the next slide, that we have launched a new website in the Division of Environmental Health, and the link is in the chat. So we encourage you to please go and have a look at our website. All the Pesticide Network discussions and the previous digests are there, so you can troll through them and find the information. And of course, this ones will be uploaded as well as this recording. There's also the Chemical Network and the Southern African Pesticide Regulators Forum, what's being done in the region. So please do have a look at our new website. And then the final slide is just to say again, thank you to everyone, and thank you to Natasha and Jen in the background for the technical work, and to remind you of our next discussion, which will be on the 25th of April. Please note the time difference. We will be doing it in the morning. It will be recorded, and this is because our presenter is from Australia, and in order to accommodate his time, to take us through RNAi and nanoscale pesticides, which are new and fast coming on the market, and for regulators and others to know about them. So thank you very much again to the three presenters and to all of you, and we hope to see you at the next discussion. Bye for now.